I remember the very real moment of the before diagnosis, the after diagnosis, and the acceptance of diagnosis. So once I had gained weight again and I was able to, participate in my hobbies that I loved, hang out with my friends, then I really started to love my ostomy. I was like, hey, I had been so sick for so long and I had tolerated and accepted this kind of, symptomatic on and off pain. And now I'm actually able to enjoy life more with my ostomy.
This is Alicia, who got diagnosed with ulcerative colitis at age 14 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. She's the acting president of Girls with Guts, an organization that helps solve IBD problems for women. Today, on the Colitis Unfiltered podcast, Alicia is going to talk to me about her own IBD journey and why awareness and advocacy is so important in the space of inflammatory bowel disease. My name is Frank Tabring, and Alicia, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to chat.
So you don't just live with IBD, you basically live and breathe IBD because you have your own, colitis journey, of course, but you're super active in terms of advocacy, awareness with an amazing organization called Girls for Guts. We'll get to that in a moment. But first, I want to go all the way back to the Alicia at 14 years old. And let's start at the beginning. Your first symptoms. Tell me a little bit about how ulcerative colitis started to manifest for you, and then also how it ultimately led to your diagnosis.
Absolutely. So I was symptomatic from birth. I had some bleeding in infancy. And so my parents were bringing me back and forth to the doctors to try and figure out what was that about. So they were trying different formulas. Eventually that kind of stopped. But, I was calling home from grade school with stomach aches every single day. And, the doctors were ruling it off as anxiety. She just doesn't want to be at school. Meanwhile, I loved school. School was like my safe haven. So I loved being there. But yeah, I had stomach aches really early on, a lot of issues with bleeding and constipation. And it was kind of pushed aside for a really long time. And ultimately, I wasn't diagnosed until I was 14. And it was very abrupt and very scary because the symptoms came on tenfold. I mean, at some point I was crawling to the bathroom because I was so severely dehydrated from all the diarrhea. And my primary doctor said that I had a case of Giardia. So I was being treated for that with antibiotics. And ultimately, surprise, it was actually IBD. So yeah, my journey, it kind of ebbed and flowed. I had symptoms as a kid and then was diagnosed as a teen. And yeah, when the symptoms hit, I mean, within a couple weeks, I was hospitalized. And then, they ran the gambit of tests. It was all very scary. And then, when the doctor came in and said, hey, you have something called ulcerative colitis, at 14, I was like, what is that, cancer? Am I going to die? I had no idea. It was traumatizing, honestly.
You mentioned crawling to the bathroom, and that sort of just hits me like a brick because that, it's a flashback 13 years ago. I was in the exact same position and so many days literally just crawling because that was the only way to get from the couch to the bathroom, right? To the toilet. So yeah, I can relate to that one. So 14 is a very young age to be hit with IBD. Tell me how you mentally, but also physically navigated the disease post-diagnosis once you kind of knew what you had and what inflammatory bowel disease was like.
When I was diagnosed, I went from diagnosis to very severe, I was having surgery within 6 months. I lost my colon ultimately within 6 months due to toxic megacolon because by the time I was diagnosed and being untreated for so long, it was so severe. I mean, that was a blessing and a curse at the same time. One, I was being given this lifelong altering illness. But on the other hand, there was, an explanation for the symptoms that I had been dealing with my entire life. And there was treatment. And so, it was really a lot to manage physically. I was, home on TPN for about 6 months. I had to start high school late. I did homeschooling for the first 6 months of my diagnosis. And yeah, I think for me physically, it was just trying to get from the severity that it had been to adjusting to that new normal and adjusting to an ostomy. Back when I was 14, I did not wanna have an ostomy. I was like, "What are the next steps to get this thing off of my body?" It really impacted my body image. I didn't even wanna go outside. I was afraid of it leaking all the time and the smell, and changing it, I didn't even wanna look at the stoma. And I think so physically, I think, it was just day to day, living day to day and trying to navigate that. Mentally, my dad was really, really ahead of the curve in terms of finding support for me. He actually found a kids forum online called Dragon Pack IBD, which had a kids forum. And I connected with someone named Katie, who I'm still in touch with today, 20 years later, who also had IBD and an ostomy. And I think having someone to talk to at that age really empowered me and allowed me to keep going because I at least had someone else to commiserate with. So I think she was a really good anchor during my initial diagnosis.
We always talk about support being so important, but then when you're 14, your entire life, your world is completely different from that of sort of an adult having to deal with IBD and finding somebody to connect with. I mean, that was, I'm sure, honestly, that was transformative for you and helped you as opposed to potentially not having that source of support and help. Now, you talked about a new normal. You talked about not wanting a surgery and who does. How did you eventually come to accept this new normal and accept, living without a colon, to connect with your body again, to, I guess, fall in love with yourself again? How did you manage to reach that point?
I remember the very real moment of the before diagnosis, the after diagnosis, and the acceptance of diagnosis. So once I had gained weight again and I was able to, participate in my hobbies that I loved, hang out with my friends, then I really started to love my ostomy. I was like, hey, I had been so sick for so long and I had tolerated and accepted this kind of, symptomatic on and off pain. And now I'm actually able to enjoy life more with my ostomy. And I had some great, very supportive friends when I did start high school. I think that really helped as well. They were very curious about it. So each of those tiny nuggets of support really built in some confidence for me and ultimately helped bridge that gap from, the initial trauma of it all to that full acceptance of the ostomy.
And so fast forward to today, let's talk about how you're feeling. Because for many, many IBD warriors, surgery is not necessarily the end. It's not the cure, right? How is it looking for you today? What's your life like? Do you have any challenges, anything that you still wrestle with?
Yeah. I mean, so my journey has definitely ebbed and flowed. So I was originally diagnosed with UC, and that first ostomy teleported me into the J pouch series where I had so many chronic issues with rectovaginal fistulae. So I was having back to back surgery, during school breaks to try and alleviate that. And ultimately, was re-diagnosed with Crohn's disease right after I graduated college, which allowed me to get onto treatment. So from my diagnosis to, 23 years old, I had been untreated, allowing my disease to sort of continue to ravage my body. And after I was re-diagnosed and that process of grieving, again, a new diagnosis and ultimately meaning there was no cure, I, started a biologic and felt after about 6 months so much better. And yeah, so I mean, ultimately, I would say that my diagnosis changed the trajectory of my life, but in a good way. It allowed me, to become more empathetic, more compassionate, more in touch with my surroundings and the people around me, more aware of everything around me as well. And the ability to enjoy the small things. Like, I didn't realize how much I missed being outside and, having the freedom to walk around without thinking about a bathroom until I ultimately had, my permanent ostomy surgery. So I think, full circle from the ostomy that I hated to this permanent ostomy that I love, it has been quite a journey.
And before we actually move on to what you're doing today, so we have the people with IBD who are rushed to the hospital and I don't know, they wake up the next day, their colon is gone. Then we have the category of people who know that they'll have to have surgery. They actually have time to prepare physically, but also mentally. You said that there was a very short period of 6 months, basically, from your diagnosis to when you had your first surgery. Tell me a little bit about, especially as such a young adult, how did you manage that mentally? That path to surgery, and especially before it happened, did you have time to prepare for it, to sort of imagine what your life would be like? Or was it rather abrupt and you didn't really have any space to get ready mentally for what was coming post-surgery?
When I was initially diagnosed, I was hospitalized for 2 months just to try and get some weight on. I had dropped about 60 pounds, which for me, that impacted my ability to walk, my muscles, everything. So I was ultimately hospitalized, put on, bowel rest, TPN, just to try and help heal some of the internal, damage that had been done. And when they went to do a scope to see if the bowel rest was helping, I woke up with an ostomy. So I had 0 time to mentally prepare. It was basically worst case scenario. I woke up a few days later after, a medically induced coma. They told me that my colon perforated during the scope and you have an ostomy. My surgeon, she tried to be positive and she was like, well, the good news is, we have the option of the J pouch down the line. Right now, we're focused on getting you well again. But with the abruptness of it all, I really struggled to get over some of those hurdles that I think having more time to prepare would have helped with.
So all you've been through, like for many of us, it led you to where you are today. And not only from a health standpoint, but also, how you spend your time and, your advocacy, your awareness. You are acting president of an organization called Girls for Guts. And for someone hearing about Girls with Guts for the first time, give me a pitch. What is this?
Girls with Guts is my absolute heart and soul. It is an organization that changed my life. And what I would say is that it's a community. It's a safe place to land for people who are newly diagnosed, maybe have been diagnosed for several years, but don't have that support. It's sister to sister, sisterhood, bonding. It's building people up. It's preparing people for those surgeries ahead of time, talking about our disease in a candid way so that, we can reduce some of the stigmas. And ultimately, yeah, it's community. It's a movement.
What made you pick advocacy instead of maybe just focusing on your recovery or on your own personal IBD journey? How did you get into being so active?
I always say that advocacy actually picked me. So I went to Syracuse for film, and I loved storytelling. I loved writing. I loved creating, small documentaries and things on important matters. And for one of my classes, we had a project that was tell the class something they might not know about you just by looking at you from the outside. And I said, do I share something, basic, or do I tell everyone that I currently have an ostomy and I have this chronic condition? And I said, let me be bold. Let me create this project around, my ostomy. And so the whole video, sort of painted the picture of my diagnosis journey. And then at the end, I did a reveal of my ostomy. And that little clip got a standing ovation in my class. They wanted to see it again. I had people coming up to me after that were like, my dad has Crohn's disease. My sister has Crohn's disease. I've never seen someone's ostomy. How are you, so confident in showing that off? And again, it was hearing those stories that really propelled me towards the thinking oh, this kind of storytelling matters. Sharing your own story really matters. And you can make an impact by doing that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And eventually it led you to Girls with Guts. So you kind of told me a bit about what it is. Now, what specific problems does this organization solve for women with IBD?
Some of the biggest hurdles and problems that we try to solve are those body image and societal dysmorphic things that people place on women specifically. You have surgery, your body's covered in scars. There's a lot of vulnerability in sharing that with other people and, feeling like yourself in your skin again. We also focus on intimacy, motherhood, sexuality, navigating life transitions and aging with IBD, which, a lot of people we are the aging generation with IBD. So trying to talk about those things that are really important to our community.
Hmm. And tell me a little bit about how this works with Girls with Guts. Are you nationwide? What I mean, and you don't have to give me specific numbers, but still, like I'm curious to see like what sort of a range you have and how many people basically you help out and support, and how does this translate this concept of Girls with Guts into action really?
Yeah, so we have a very active private forum of about 10,000, and then from our, social media pages span between 21,000 to 24,000 depending where. And so the way that we turn our, mission into action is through education, medically reviewed information and education that we can share with our community, because sometimes in understanding that medical jargon is very hard for the lay patient. So we want people to feel like they are empowered with the tools, the questions to ask their doctors, especially as it relates to women's issues. We also have a variety of other programming. We have, in-person retreats. We invite 60 to 70 women annually to join us at a different location just to create that access across the nationally. We do have some friends in Europe as well, and some Canadian friends that do travel in to come to our retreats, which is really awesome. And then, yeah, we have, other programs. One program, our butt basket program. So we send out these post-op care packs and infusion kits to our community members who might need that extra support during those. And yeah, we try to bridge the gaps through in-person programming and virtual programming as well, so we could bring our community together.
That's really amazing. So for anybody who's listening and is interested in sort of looking into this is Girls with Guts. You have a strong online presence, obviously, and the link is going to be in the show notes as well. So Alicia, what does a day look like for you as president of Girls with Guts?
So a day for me, I mean, it's not just emails. It's a lot of strategy, community building, prepping and planning out our retreats, our programming. It's checking in on different volunteers, our board members, making sure that we are all still unified in the mission of the organization, talking to other, advocate friends, picking their brains on ways we can collaborate and things like that. And then yeah, it's connecting with our partners, our sponsors, maintaining those relationships.
And with all that going on, do you actually still have the time to really talk to the people that are seeking help from you and your organization?
So that's one thing that I refuse to let go of, because that is just a personal piece for me that I feel so strongly, tied to our mission, and it affects me personally. And so if, we're at a retreat and there's someone who just had ostomy surgery and needs someone to talk to, I will sit down with them, connect with them, share my tips and tricks. Or if that's answering, somebody's post in the forum where they're seeking support, I do try and, as much as my other board members would like me to step back a little bit so that I could focus on some of the other things that we need to do, I still really like to be as close to the community as possible.
I totally understand, and I think that's the heart of the whole thing anyway, right? And you cannot just step away from the heart of the whole organizations and its purpose. Now, how has Girls with Guts evolved since you've taken on this role? And looking ahead, also, what's your vision for this organization?
When I started with the organization back in 2013, I actually started as the director of multimedia. So I was responsible for getting our social media off the ground. I remember when I had to get our Facebook page set up as a business, and it was like, you need at least 100 likes to make it like an official Facebook page. Not to age
Yeah.
myself, but back in the day when it was, everything was sort of newer and fresh. And I also did our retreat recaps as well. But so we started with our first retreat had 30 attendees, and that has tremendously blown up to the way that we actually have two retreats now to support 100 women a year. So we've expanded in that way. We've expanded on social media and our educational outreach. And we've also, expanded in some of our educational components as well. So trying to stay up to date with, what's going on, how can we bring that to our community? And yeah, it's been a shocking amount of growth, not only with our organization, but with the IBD community and advocacy space at large. one thing that I'm very passionate about, and a lot of organizations are already doing this well, but for teen girls specifically, I would love for us to eventually get into the teen programming space, doing teen and caregiver retreats, to build up some of that empowerment that I learned early on and gained early on, and being able to give that to the next generation. So
That's the direction that you want Girls for Guts to take into, right?
I mean, I love that we support 18 and up women, with IBD and their ostomies for any reason. I think there are some programming things that we're bringing in the next year to continue to support that, but I do see us eventually getting into that teen programming gap to help between the teen to the adult transition. I think there's still a big, gap there, and I would love to be able to figure out how to bridge that.
And that makes perfect sense because you personally have a lot of experience in that specific category and age range, right? So yeah, that makes complete sense. So this all sounds amazing. This all sounds positive, but there's no job without challenges. And I'm just curious to see what your main challenges are, especially running such an organization in this particular space.
I mean, obviously, one of the biggest challenges for nonprofits is funding. I feel like, that's a constant hurdle that we are trying to get over annually. And it's also, trying to find the balance and not taking on all of the emotional weight of the stories so that we can remain a strong foundation for our community. I think it can become very easy to try and, solve each individual person's problem that's coming to us. But we want to make sure that we are really, sustainable and can be around for a long time to serve as that piece of support.
Really, really great. I want to take a very quick deep dive into some of the issues that you help women with in regards to IBD. So you mentioned body image, you mentioned intimacy, you mentioned relationships. So let's talk about these three very briefly. How do you think surgeries, ostomies, scars impact how women see themselves?
Knowing my own personal journey, there's a lot of grief that comes with, feeling like you're losing autonomy of your body as it's changing with, surgical scars, weight loss, different things like that. So I feel like that grief is very real and it kind of ebbs and flows. One day you may be feeling very confident in your body. One day you might be wearing a pair of jeans that don't quite fit over your ostomy and that, the wave of grief comes back again. I think in our society, body image is just a huge disfigurement to our community. And then when you layer chronic illness and the fluctuations with that on top of it, it can be really hard to navigate if you don't have a sense of support that can help you really lean in through that.
So obviously, at least over the last years, I could not say decade, but at least the last years, the presence of IBD community advocacy awareness, especially on social media, has really exploded, which is really fantastic. And I still think to this day that there are times where mental health is one of those issues that are sort of kept a little bit on the side or not talked about enough. Another one that I kind of rarely see is intimacy. So how often do you actually see women struggling with intimacy and relationships because of the IBD journey that they're going through?
Oh my gosh. I think I see a question in our private forum probably every other day about this. It's starting with dating. How do I tell someone? When do I tell someone that I have this disease? It's will I have an accident during sex? Will my ostomy bag come off? It's are there things that I can wear to feel better in my skin? It's all of those pieces and all of those layers and trying to find a new way to have a relationship with your body. We hear it constantly. Still, things have really shifted over the years, but intimacy and relationships, it's a big one. It's still a very big one.
It really is. And if I go back 13 years, in the year that I was diagnosed, when I was still flaring actually, and I used to go on dates. The very first one I went, I basically spilled everything on the first date. And I don't think it went very well because I think it was information overload. So just very bluntly, when do I tell someone about my IBD?
I think it varies. I think it varies on your comfortability level. In the beginning of my journey, I would wait for, a few dates, see if things were really going to take off. And then I would sort of slip it in there like, hey, by the way, I have this thing. You don't have to worry about it right now. I'm in remission, but these things could happen. To when I, started dating my girlfriend in the last couple of years, I had all of the information about myself very publicly on my social channels. So she could see it. It was out there. There was no hiding it. And so I think that that really helped to bridge the gap in that conversation, and she did her own research. She was really incredible in that way. And she wanted to see my ostomy and see me do a bag change, and very supportive. And I think it really depends on your comfort level and, the readiness, in sharing. I don't think there's anything wrong with waiting. And I don't think there's anything wrong with sharing it on the first date if you're just trying to rip the Band-Aid off. It takes some practice sometimes.
Exactly. If you're a
Yeah.
risk taker, hey, just blurt it all out and put all the fish on the table, right?
Yeah.
So great. Now, how do you think IBD intersects with things like dating, marriage, and then also particularly wanting children? And I mentioned the children part because just today on TikTok of all places, somebody sent me a message and said, "Hey, a pregnancy and ulcerative colitis, is that safe? What does that look like?"
I think that, obviously there's a lot of changing data with pregnancy and IBD. What medicines can you be on? Does surgery impact that? And I think it's having that conversation with your doctor. I think that's the best place to start because your care team can really come up with a personalized plan for you depending on where you are in your journey. I have many a friend who has had a very successful pregnancy with IBD, being on their medications and safely, having children. And then I know, a gambit of us who have had issues with fertility. And I think it really is personal. And ultimately, your care team is the best place to start with that.
Shifting back to you, you've had your IBD journey. You've had this Girls with Guts journey now. You've spoken to, I'm assuming, just hundreds and hundreds of people, dealing with IBD, mental health, physical challenges. And I always say that IBD, like any other, serious disease, it changes you as a person, or it shapes you as a person as well. In your case, you were 14 when you were diagnosed, and you already had symptoms before that. So in what way has inflammatory bowel disease shaped the Alicia that you are today?
Like I said, I'm a big storyteller. I got a typewriter when I was like 8 years old, and I immediately was on that thing writing stories. And so I think, one, again, it has given me empathy and compassion for all kinds of illnesses. I feel like I know how to level with people who are really struggling. It doesn't have to be IBD. And then that storytelling element. I feel like having lived through this, have a very, different lens on life that other people might not have. And I would say it's given me a unique perspective on living because each day is not guaranteed to be the same. So
I like to really skim Reddit communities because on Reddit, you have actually a lot of activity, ostomy subreddits, colitis subreddits, Crohn subreddits, and lots of times that's sort of the starting point for people who have just been diagnosed, right? And then just today, I saw a post for somebody who said, my life is over, ? Or I just got diagnosed, now what? If for somebody who just got told that they have colitis or Crohn's, somebody who's overwhelmed a bit, what would your first words of advice be?
it would be that you are not alone. There are, hundreds of thousands of us out here. There are niche communities for each person, and it's okay to grieve. It's okay to grieve. It's a lot to process. It does change your life in a variety of ways. And then the last piece of advice I would give is to find one person that you can talk to candidly about the disease. That takes off a huge burden and mental load for you. And I think ultimately for me, having had Katie back in the day, that changed the trajectory of my entire journey. Without having had that connection, I'm not sure that I would feel as, empowered or as confident or, able to talk about my experience as I would have otherwise.
So then what's one thing that you wish every person with IBD understood earlier?
For me personally, I think one thing that I wish I understood earlier is that IBD is lifelong. So you have to learn how to befriend it. Because when I was diagnosed, my priority was, how do I get rid of it? How do I hide it? How do I minimize it? How do I get rid of this? What can I take that just erases it from my life? And then I quickly realized, no, it was here to stay, and it's better to befriend it, figure out what works for you, figure out the adjustments that you need to make. And yeah, it's better to find ways to work with it than just pretend that it doesn't exist. I think that will impact your mental health. That will make you feel more isolated as well. And yeah, I think for me, befriending it was ultimately, what made the most sense and has been the best for my journey.
So looking into the future, do you think that we'll see an IBD cure in our lifetime?
I would love to say yes, I really would. And so many things have changed in the last 20 years, but I'm not sure. I mean, I will say I hope so. Fingers crossed. But if nothing else, the support has changed. The medication landscape has changed. I think that there is a great chance and a better chance of success and remission for patients that are newly diagnosed now with the treatments and support that's out there. So fingers crossed that we do have a treatment in our lifetime. But if not, I think, being diagnosed now versus 20 years ago, you're in a much better place.
And even if it might take a little bit longer to get to that point, like you just mentioned, though, the support, the community, basically worldwide has really grown, and Girls with Guts is certainly doing its part. You are certainly doing its part. So keep doing that. I think you're not just helping people. I'm pretty convinced that you're actually changing a lot of people's lives as well, and that's really great. So, Alicia, thank you so much for speaking to me today and for also sharing your world, your journey, and what you do with Girls with Guts. I wish you nothing but the best moving forward. And like I just mentioned, keep doing what you're doing, because even if you just help one person, that's a massive success already. So
yeah, thank you so much for having me.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks. That's it for today's episode of Colitis Unfiltered. I'm Frank Tabering, and if this hit home or hit your gut, do us a favor, subscribe to the show, and follow us at Colitis Unfiltered on YouTube, Substack, Instagram, Threads, TikTok, and Reddit. We'll see you soon for more inspiring stories from the bathroom floor.